Good evening. Welcome to Kenya News Update today. I'm your host, and this is our World News Deep Dive. In a courtroom in the southern Italian city of Croton, a trial is unfolding that has become a defining moral and legal reckoning for Europe's approach to migration. 6 Italian officials, 4 from the Guardia di Finanza and 2 from the Coast Guard, are facing charges of involuntary manslaughter and culpable shipwreck. Their alleged failure to act, prosecutors say, led to one of the deadliest maritime disasters in the Mediterranean in a decade. Tonight, we examine the Cutro shipwreck of February 2023, the trial that has Italy and the European Union on edge, and the ongoing human tragedy at sea. We'll present the prosecution's case, the defense's arguments, and the broader political firestorm this has ignited under Italy's far-right Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni. Our first chapter, the night of the wreck. It was around a.m. on February 26, 2023. A wooden gullet, a type of Turkish sailing vessel, was adrift in stormy seas just off the coast of Calabria, Italy's southern toe. On board were migrants who had paid smugglers for the journey from Turkey, hoping for a new life in Europe. The Italian authorities knew the boat was there. According to court documents and survivor testimony, the European border agency Frontex had spotted the vessel hours earlier and alerted Italian maritime rescue coordination centers. A patrol boat from the Guardia di Finanza, a police force with maritime duties, was dispatched to locate it. They found it. But as a storm with waves over 2 meters high battered the coast, a critical decision, or a catastrophic failure, occurred. The prosecution alleges the officials did not launch a rescue operation. Instead, they waited, perhaps expecting the boat to continue its journey or for calmer seas. That wait ended in horror. The overloaded, unseaworthy boat, pushed by the gale-force winds, smashed into a rocky shoal near the beach at Steccato di Cutro. It disintegrated on impact. The immediate aftermath was chaos. Bodies and debris were strewn across the beach by the morning light. Local residents and firefighters waded into the freezing water to pull survivors from the waves. The final death toll was staggering. At least 94 people lost their lives that night, but the human cost becomes even more heartbreaking when you look at the breakdown. Among the dead were 35 children. Entire families were wiped out. Survivors, many of whom lost everyone they were traveling with, numbered around 80. They were the lucky ones, pulled from the icy water or washed ashore clinging to wreckage. For days afterward, bodies continued to wash up along the coastline, a grim testament to the scale of the disaster. This was not just a shipwreck, it was a mass casualty event that happened within sight of land, under the watch of the Italian state. This brings us to our second chapter, the charges and the accused. Who are these 6 men on trial, and what exactly are they accused of? The defendants include the captain of the Guardia di Finanza patrol boat, his crew members, and personnel from the local Coast Guard Operations Center. They are not high-ranking politicians making policy. They are mid-level officials tasked with execution and response. The charge of culpable shipwreck is a specific Italian legal statute. It implies that through negligence, omission, or error, they caused the sinking of a vessel. Combined with involuntary manslaughter for the 94 deaths, the charges carry the potential for significant prison sentences. The core of the prosecution's case is timeline and duty. They argue the officials had a clear legal and humanitarian duty to intervene the moment the vessel was identified as being in distress in dangerous conditions. By failing to launch rescue boats or helicopters in a timely manner, they allegedly violated maritime law and the fundamental principle of rendering assistance to those in peril at sea. Let's visualize the critical gap the prosecution is focusing on. The prosecution's timeline shows a fatal delay of several hours between first detection and the catastrophic impact. The visual evidence, including Frontex flight logs and radar data, will be central. The defense, however, is expected to paint a very different picture. Their argument, previewed in pre-trial hearings, hinges on 2 points: operational judgment and the actions of the smugglers. First, they will likely argue that the commanding officers on scene made a professional assessment. They may claim the patrol boat, not designed for heavy rescue in storm conditions, could not safely approach without risking its own crew. They might say they were monitoring the situation, waiting for a window. Second, and more pointedly, they will place ultimate blame on the smugglers. The defense will argue the tragedy was caused by ruthless traffickers who packed migrants onto a death trap, provided no life jackets, and directed the boat toward a dangerous shore in a storm. In this narrative, the Italian officials were witnesses to a crime in progress, not its perpetrators. This legal battle is set against our third chapter, the Political Inferno. The Cutro shipwreck did not happen in a vacuum. It occurred just months after Giorgia Meloni took office as Prime Minister, leading a coalition with a hardline stance on migration. Her government had just passed and was beginning to enforce a controversial decree known as the Cutro Decree, named with tragic irony after the very town where the disaster later struck. This law restricted the operations of NGO rescue ships, imposed hefty fines on them, and aimed to drastically reduce the number of migrant landings. The disaster, therefore, struck at the heart of her political identity. Opposition politicians and humanitarian groups immediately seized on the tragedy. They argued that Meloni's rhetoric and policies, which focused on blocking departures and deterring arrivals, had created a climate of non-assistance that filtered down to the operational level. The message, they claimed, was to discourage rescue, not to conduct it. The government fiercely rejected this. Meloni visited Cutro, expressed sorrow, but defended her policies, blaming smugglers and calling for more European cooperation to stop departures. The trial now forces a direct examination. Did a political climate influence an operational failure? To understand the scale of the challenge Italy faces, let's look at the numbers. The central Mediterranean route from North Africa to Italy remains the deadliest migration path in the world. In the year of the Cutro disaster, 2023, the United Nations recorded over 2,500 deaths and disappearances on this route alone. That's an average of nearly 7 people dying every single day. The year before, 2022, saw over 1,400 fatalities. The trend is horrifyingly consistent. While the Italian government points to a reduction in arrivals as a policy success, and indeed, landings in 2024 were down from a 2023 peak, the death rate per crossing often remains high or even increases as smugglers use more dangerous methods and routes to evade patrols. This is the brutal arithmetic of despair that plays out weekly on Europe's southern frontier. The Cutro victims are a large subset of this annual toll, but their case is unique because it happened so close to shore, under known surveillance, making the question of responsibility unavoidable. Our fourth chapter, The Human Stories and the European Dimension. Beyond the statistics and the political blame game are the individual lives shattered. Survivors from Afghanistan, Iran, Pakistan, and Syria have given harrowing testimony. One man lost his wife and all 3 of his children. A teenager saw his siblings drown. These stories form the emotional core of the prosecution's case. They traveled seeking safety or opportunity, trusting smugglers with their lives and life savings, only to meet a terrifying end on a European beach. Their quest highlights a fundamental European contradiction. The EU has a border agency, Frontex, with a budget of hundreds of millions of euros, equipped with planes, drones, and ships to monitor frontiers. Yet its mandate is primarily border control, not humanitarian rescue. This creates a perverse situation where a boat can be spotted, tracked, and reported, yet no rescue is automatically triggered unless a member state's coordination center deems it necessary. The Cutro case exposes this fatal gap in the system. It raises the question, is Europe's priority saving lives or securing borders? The trial in Croton is, in many ways, putting that very question in the dock. As the trial proceeds through 2026, several key pieces of evidence will be scrutinized. Audio recordings of radio communications between the patrol boat, the Coast Guard Center, and other authorities will be critical. What was said? Were requests for backup made and denied? Logbooks detailing the actions and observations of the crew will be examined. Meteorological data will confirm the severity of the storm. Perhaps most damning are the survivor accounts, which consistently describe seeing the lights of the Italian patrol boat nearby before the wreck. The defense will counter with technical data about the patrol boat's capabilities, wave heights, and visibility. They will likely call expert witnesses on maritime safety to testify that an attempted rescue in those conditions could have caused a collision or capsizing, potentially making the situation worse. This will be a classic hindsight versus real-time decision, making argument common in negligence cases. Now, let's consider the potential outcomes and ramifications. If convicted, the 6 officials could face years in prison, sending a shockwave through Italy's law enforcement and Coast Guard institutions. It would be seen as a landmark ruling establishing a legal duty to rescue, regardless of political climate or migration policies. It could empower prosecutors to investigate other deadly incidents. An acquittal, however, would be hailed by Meloni's government as vindication of its personnel and a reinforcement of its narrative that smugglers are the sole villains. It would likely embolden stricter enforcement of the existing restrictive laws. But internationally, an acquittal could be seen as a green light for impunity and a further erosion of the humanitarian principle of rescue at sea. It would devastate the victims' families and advocacy groups. Beyond the verdict, the trial has already had one concrete effect: a change in Italian protocol. In the wake of Cutro, the government issued new directives emphasizing that the duty to save lives at sea takes precedence over any other consideration. Whether this change in writing translates to a change in practice on stormy nights remains to be seen. Finally, we look at the broader context for Kenya and Africa. While this tragedy involves a route from Turkey, the parallels to the migration routes from North Africa are stark. Many of those attempting the central Mediterranean crossing embark from Libya or Tunisia, having traveled from across sub-Saharan Africa, including from nations in the Horn like Ethiopia and Somalia, and from West Africa. They are fleeing conflict like the ongoing instability in Sudan, persecution, and the devastating impacts of climate shocks, which the UN notes is a key driver of displacement in regions like Mozambique. The journey is just as perilous. African leaders, including President William Ruto of Kenya, have consistently called for more legal pathways for migration and for addressing the root causes: poverty, conflict, and climate change that force people onto these deadly boats. The European Union's approach, as seen in deals with Tunisia and Libya to intercept and return migrants, often externalizes its border control, creating humanitarian crises in transit countries. The trial in Italy is a microcosm of this global failure. It's about the moment a boat hits the rocks, but the chain of responsibility stretches back to smuggling networks, unstable states, and international policies that offer few alternatives to a deadly voyage. In conclusion, the courtroom in Croton is more than a venue for a criminal trial. It is a stage where Europe is judging itself. The questions asked here, about duty, responsibility, and the value of human life, resonate far beyond Calabria. They touch on the kind of union Europe wants to be. As President Donald Trump's administration in the United States also pursues stringent border policies, the global debate on migration grows ever more polarized. The verdict in this case will be a powerful symbol. Will it be a symbol of accountability, affirming that states and their agents have an unwavering obligation to save lives? Or will it be a symbol of fortress mentality, where borders are defended at a horrific human cost? For the 80 survivors and the families of the 94 dead, the answer is a matter of justice long delayed. For the rest of us watching, it is a measure of our collective conscience. This has been our deep dive on the Cutro shipwreck trial. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to Kenya News Update today.